You're watching Cable 2.
Hello and welcome to the first Buildings and Grounds meeting of the 2023 year. Yay, we're all here together. So welcome everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Just since this is our first meeting, I'm going to introduce those that are on Buildings and Grounds this year. We have myself, Sabrina Kuhn, as chair, Travonia Brown Gaither as vice chair, Richard Watts, Susan Miller, and Leah Crowley. So thanks you all for being here. And first item on the agenda, we have Daryl with the Duke Energy.
Good afternoon and congratulations to those that are new to the board, and welcome to those that were with us before in our first meeting. We look forward to working with you in our buildings and grounds. The first item is, you're going to see a lot of these while doing your tenure with the board. This is basically an easement for Duke Energy related to the senior living project that's at the Old Brown Elementary School across from the Career Center, and Kennedy and Carter. And so this is really just a standard easement protocol that, again, you'll see quite regularly throughout the years. Any questions?
Good. Okay. And you get to go again.
Okay. Item 2 is a little unique too, just to give those that are new to the board a little history. The county, actually the property that our maintenance facility sits on is owned by the county, not by the school board. And the county has sold that property for development, and about 50% of it's already been developed. And so the county purchased a building at 3810 North Liberty Street that would be moving our maintenance department, or part of our maintenance department, over. What you have before you is the bids for the renovation for that. There's no financial impact to the district on this. This is money the county's going to pay for that. This is kind of a pass-through from you guys. And then at this point, if you'll accept our recommendation as West Bend Construction to do the work, then we will contact the county and request those funds to oversee the project for the renovation. That I'll entertain any questions if there are any.
If the receipts go over on construction for any reason, the county is still responsible for any receipts going over that 514.
So just so you know, so basically right now, there's about a $2 million budget for this renovation. As you see, we're coming in at $514,000. So the other, right about $1.4 million will be available to the district should we choose to do another project that, we've talked about Haynes as well. We could, that money's got some flexibility to it that we could use at an additional project down the road.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening, Chair Kuhn, members of the board and Buildings and Ground Committee, and Superintendent McManus. All right, so next item up for consideration is regarding Philo Hill Edifice Pre-Construction Services Contract Review and Change Order for that same contract. Just a little bit of background. In the 2016 bond program, Philo Hill is set to have some work done to the school to renovate and update some of the classroom spaces at that school facility. This item helps prepare or helps fund the pre-construction services offered and selected by the district for Edifice to complete their bidding phase of this project. So that's the $56,600 ask for this item specifically. there any questions or concerns about the item? Okay,
I want to make sure
sure.
that I understand too. It's because when we approved this, and it's been, what, 3 or 4 years since then, so that's why they're asking for this change order.
Right,
this
so,
amount.
correct, yeah, so they figured when we approved the item in 2018 that they would be there for about a year doing some pre-construction services while design was happening for Philo. We've had some iterations of design that has continued on the design process and the timeline for the project that has extended Edifice's, anticipated time for work to be performed. So that's why they're asking for this additional $56,000.
And I saw that we were reallocating funds from another project. So what are we gonna lose by, or how is that gonna affect it by using the reallocation of those funds?
So no reallocations are going to happen for this
This
project. It's going to be reallocated from inside the project itself. So we're going to take from the budget line item for general contract to fund these changes.
Nick, can
Yes.
you really quickly, I know one of the things the board asked during agenda review is just a high level, because some of
Yeah.
them weren't as, and it may be your next item, so please just tell me that you're getting to it if you are.
I
Just
can-
a high level, what are we doing at Philo, just real quick?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, current design is to renovate the core of the building. So when I say the core, I mean the admin, auditorium. There's a CTE set of classrooms, the gymnasium, all the locker rooms, the kitchen cafeteria space, and renovate those spaces into new use spaces. So they're not going to stay necessarily an auditorium or not going to stay necessarily a kitchen cafeteria. The only place in that core is going to stay classrooms, as the CTE piece is going to stay as CTE use, and the gymnasium will stay a gymnasium. Everything else will get repurposed within the new design. The classroom wings that exist now, the plan is to demolish those classroom wings. So those 2 step-down sections at Philo will be completely demolished, and we will add back that space along with the media center, a new entryway, and kitchen cafeteria space on the other side of the school core building, and build like a 3-story classroom addition on the back side of that facility. Yep. And just so you know, that pricing for that is going to come early part of February, and I'll be back to the board in about March to talk about the guaranteed maximum price for that project. Okay. Any questions about that item? All right, next item up for consideration is the change order for Urstory Break Appleyard for the same project location. Similar reasoning, time extension, the impact to inflation over that time frame for that service provider. That's the reasoning for the additional $267,000 for Urstory Break. And again, that doesn't come from another project, that stays within the project. When we come time to talk about GMP, we'll talk about reallocations for that big lump of construction costs. Any questions? Okay. Last item, and then I'll sit down, is reallocation of funding for some existing projects. And I say existing, these projects are closed out, specifically Mount Tabor High School Stadium Replacement, Glenn High School, and Parkland High School Safety and Traffic. Those projects are well and done. These are just remainder amounts left in the budgets for those projects that I'm reallocating to fill out the needs for East Forsyth's design and Ashley's land acquisition. The pre-K additions was part of the Griffith expansion project, so there's money in there for that six classroom pre-K center that we were going to build there, that the board in September gave us direction to halt on that project. So that's where that pre-K additions is that Griffith money for those 6 classrooms. And I'm leaving a little balance in there, but at future meetings, I'll talk about reallocating additional funds from there to serve for other needs. Any questions?
And I'm understanding correctly that the reason why Ashley is only getting the 100,000 and it's not like an even split or they get more is because that is just kind of what they have left in their need bucket. Is that my?
So that 100,000 is going to go toward the last remaining. I think there's 3 properties that we need to purchase from private entities. So that's going to help us pay for the last 3 properties that we need to have for full design of Ashley. Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to move into action items. Motion to consider full board or approval for the Duke Energy easement.
I make the motion.
Second?
All right, any discussion? I forgot my microphone, y'all, sorry. All right, all in favor? Okay, motion passed. Motion for the approval for bids for renovation for 3810 Liberty Street.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Motion passed. Motion to consider full board approval for Philo Hill change order for the edifice contract.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Motion passed. Okay, motion for full board approval for the Philo Hill, the second contract, it's the Esroy Break Apple Yard.
Move to approve.
Second?
All in favor? Motion passed. And then, motion to approve the 2016 bond reallocations for the Ashley and East Forsyth High School.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor? And motion passed. All right. Our next meeting for Buildings and Grounds will be Tuesday, February 14th. And unless there's any other announcements, we are adjourned for Buildings and Grounds. Thanks, guys.
All right, I will call to order the Policy Committee. For the record, the members of the Policy Committee are myself as chair, Board Member Wood is vice chair, Board Member Leah Crowley, and Board Member Sabrina Kuhn, as well as Board Member Travonia Brown Gaither. We have 2 discussion items this evening. The first is the proposed revisions to Policy 5140, Child Abuse and Neglect, with Deion Jenkins, our Chief Legal Counsel.
Good evening, Chair Bohannon, members of the Policy Committee and the Board, and Superintendent McManus. I just have a few changes to review for the child abuse and neglect policy. The impetus and the reason for these changes is to update the policy and also bring it in alignment with current case law about the child abuse and reporting obligations, not only for employees, but for all adults. And so I don't have a presentation, but I'll walk through the changes and explain them, and I'm happy to entertain any questions that you may have. In Section 2, and I know that Ms. Crowley had submitted some suggestions, so I'll note those as well, but in Section 2A, you'll see that I adjusted the language to clarify that any person is required to make these reports, not just employees. But I did see that the word employee in the second to last sentence is still there, so I will make the same change there to say any person. So that applies not only to employees, but to volunteers and any adult who is aware of a child who fits one of these categories is required to report it to DSS and law enforcement. The second paragraph is new, and this is in response to the 2019 legislation that expanded the child abuse and reporting requirements. So not only do we have obligations to report any known or suspected children who are the victim of abuse, neglect, or dependency, but now we all have an affirmative obligation to report to law enforcement any student any child who is the victim of child abuse, a violent offense, or a sexual offense, as those terms are defined in the statute. So that section there is meant to commemorate that. Section 3, I think, has the bulk of the changes, and for the most part, these changes, again, are intended to bring the policy in alignment with current law. As you'll see, there are some things that are bold and italicized and some that are not. The bold and italicized areas are the proposed changes, and I did that to make it a little bit easier for you to see them. But, once this goes out for public comment and ultimately when the board approves the changes, there will be no bolds or italics, so everything will look the same. But I meant to kind of highlight the changes. And so I'll just kind of scroll through, and you'll see that there are some changes in the statutory references because the previous ones were outdated. There's been some repeals of some statutes and some updates. So I just updated all those statutory references and amended the sections that defined neglected juvenile, as well as added some definitions for caretaker, because a caretaker also must comply with the statute, and the new definitions for violent offenses and sexual offenses. On the last page, in sections 5 and 6, I added new language to comply with the law that signifies what the penalty might be for failure to report, as well as to solidify our mandatory training requirement that was also imposed as a part of the 2019 legislation for employees of the school system. And speaking with Dr. Stokes, who is our Assistant Superintendent of Student Services, I may actually add an additional sentence or two in this last section because there's more recent legislation that actually requires us to do a level of training for students as well. So, but I did want to at least bring this forward to you as well so you can review. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Once this is approved, is there a training with the staff on this? Or does it just go in the policy book?
So the staff has already been receiving training because the legislation went into effect in 2019. And so there's already trainings that happen on an annual basis with personnel.
And will we see the sentence or two added about the student portion before it goes for public comment, or will how does that work?
So what I'll do is, if it's okay with the committee, is I will get with Dr. Stokes to add that language, send it out to you all by email whenever it's posted for public comment. So that way you'll see it at the same time. And then it will come back to you again for final approval, where if there's any additional changes, we can make those at that time. You're welcome.
Deanna, could you talk a little bit about section, Roman number 4, about the immunity provisions?
Sure.
The last phrase says if a person was acting in good faith. Can you explain to a layman maybe?
Sure.
That person what that means?
So the intent of this is to protect individuals who receive information or receive reports that appear to be legitimate, who make the reports that they're required to make under the law, from any kind of liability if for some reason or another it's investigated by by DSS or law enforcement and it ends up not being true. So this is meant to essentially protect individuals who are making the required reports that they're supposed to make when they do legitimately feel that a student is in danger. If not, if there was some immunity that was imposed for making false reports, people would be less inclined to make these reports. So our obligation is not to investigate these allegations or to make judgments about the veracity of them. It's if people make reports, these required reports, in good faith, meaning it's information they've observed, it's credible information they've received, a child has made a report to them about what's going on, and the agency subsequently determines that there's no truth to it or it's not what it was reported to be, there's no personal liability for that person who made the report.
Follow-up question, please.
Mm-hmm.
What about someone who who is not acting in good faith and files a false report? I mean, I don't know if you ever have that situation.
I've never experienced it. I mean, in most cases, people are operating off of good faith information they've received, but making a false police report is a crime.
Okay.
And so there would be criminal penalties for that, if they knowingly make a false report.
Right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Dion, I just have on Roman numeral 2 on page 7, and it's just a typo.
Roman numeral 2,
On letter B on page,
okay, I'm sorry.
where you have where the juvenile resides or is found.
Mm-hmm.
You have ETHE.
Oh,
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I will fix that.
yeah.
It's one of those like hidden things.
Yeah, it is.
Any other questions? Okay. Would you like me to move to the next one? Okay. So the next policy that I have here for you to review is policy 9000, and there are some very minor changes here. This is in regards to the discussion that you had at your orientation about the time of your committee meetings and the location of those meetings. And so I will just first call your attention to page 5 of the policy, under subsection 5D, where it talks about the time of the standing committees. Previously, the committees, as you know, were scheduled to start at 4:30 and at 5, but based on the discussions, it sounded like the consensus was to move those to 4 o'clock and 4:45. Same days, but just moving them up to a little bit earlier. And so that's the change on page 5. And then one other change that I think is really more so kind of a technical correction, on page 8 of the document, where it talks about the regular board meeting beginning at 5:30, I just added the language, shall be called to order at 5:30 or at the conclusion of the prior committee meeting, if there's one scheduled. So if for some reason a committee meeting ends before 5:30, we can call the meeting to order prior to. That's just more of kind of a technical correction, but that's the second change on page 8.
Do we need to put the location in policy if we're changing locations, or do we need to talk about it?
Sure. The location of the committee meetings is not in the policy. However, I do believe there was some discussions about moving the location back to room 233, where it was prior to the pandemic. 223, I'm sorry. Thank you. I could get those mixed up. 223.
And,
So-
and it can't be broadcast live, but there are possibilities that maybe it could be recorded for the public
I will have
at a
to,
future.
I'll have to ask our,
Do you want me to get
Technology
Brent to
Okay.
answer a couple of questions about that? Lauren, will you grab Brent? Yep.
I know that it could not be broadcast. I do not know about the ability to record. But one thing that was brought to my attention, which I had not thought about, was the individual who does the minutes for the meetings looks at recordings of the meetings. And so if we can't record from that room, we would have to figure out a different way to have the meeting minutes taken simultaneously. But I'll defer to Brent. Sorry, Brent. And there was a question about what capabilities are there to record from that room?
In 223.
Oh,
In
there are none.
223. Okay.
There are no
Okay.
capabilities to record. I mean, I'll just go back in history a little bit, though, just so you know. Part of the reason it ultimately moved was we had issues with, you may remember, granted, this has calmed down a lot, but we had a lot of public interest in those committee meetings at some point in time. And the way that room is constructed, the entry to the room is at the speaker's rear. So that was, first off, a problem through the meeting. Folks would continually enter. We ended up, at one point, being asked to have a public speaking policy written for people to speak during committee meetings because so many folks were at the committee meetings. If you may recall, some of you, that at some point in time, folks would get up and start just talking in the meetings, just because the setup is so informal, it kind of led to that, and that was hard to stop. The recording element was another aspect of it. And then just the ability to hear in that room. We started being asked for microphones and sound equipment that's limited in that room as well, and to see the presentation. So we did add, there's still a big monitor in the back of the room, but that became a limitation too. So there were lots of limitations to that room that led to ultimately moving it with Dr. Hairston to 219 and expanding it so that the public could get in easier, they could hear easier, could see a little bit better. Still no recording capability for broadcast in that room, but there was audio for that room. And then ultimately with COVID, we ended up in here. And quite honestly, just from our team's perspective, this room's a whole lot easier because we can record everything. We have an instantaneous recording of everything that happens. It's easy to control traffic. It's easy to control people coming in and out. It's easy to just manage the room in a lot more ways. So that's kind of where my thoughts are if you talk about moving to 223.
I think there was just some discussion amongst board members that it was easier to have good conversation in that room. And that there weren't a lot of people streaming the committee meetings.
We looked this afternoon again. I know Chris had said, on average, there's around 15 to 25 that watched live. I think where we see some of the uptick in numbers around 50 to 75 is that because they have a recording to watch after the fact.
Okay.
Which there would be no recording. And that was another piece. You know, we were getting a little bit of pressure at some point in time to make sure that we had what happened in the committee meetings readily available. Well, it takes time for the minutes to be approved, and the minutes were the only thing that we have and would continue to have for those committee meetings for folks to then look at if they weren't able to participate.
Brent, really quickly, I know the board, again, in orientation, liked the small rectangular facing each other versus this more formalized. And those committees, you know, the nothing goes out of committee that then wouldn't be in the full board. Like, so everything in committee that is going to need a vote would come to a full board meeting. So then that opens it up to the public comment and everything else that associated with that. So really that looking at each other was really conducive to them having quality conversation. So my question about recording is there this is going to sound very antiquated, is there just a way to record it? Because the recording is more for the minutes. Is that accurate? Is the recording more for the minutes to be able to be taken and then posted? Or is the recording more, so is it audio or audio and visual is what are we talking about here?
So I think originally, just because there was no instantaneous other than the meeting, we tried to figure out a way to have a recording, which to have a quality recording, you need a microphone in front of every single person so that you can capture every single thing that happens. You've been in a room with a speakerphone set up in the middle and how things get lost. Well, in a meeting like that, you're not going to know that until after the fact if you're just doing audio. Obviously, though, once we moved into here and the folks got used to a visual component to it, you know, there was both elements all the time. So it just made it easier, and I don't want to speak for Dion, but because there was an instantaneous visual and audio component to it, and the audio system now is even better as of last week, or as of the break, than it was before.
So I think from my perspective, there are a couple things. First, this setup, and I'll speak for me, this setup isn't really conducive to quality conversation because we can't see everybody. And then I think also one of the reasons why we also talked in orientation about how previously there was a lot of redundancy, and I think that the reason why is because people weren't seeing those committee meetings, and the complaint was, we don't know what you all are seeing during the committee meetings, and so we feel like you're not being transparent when you show up and you vote. And so what the board was doing, they were using the same PowerPoint that was in the committee because they wanted to be transparent, and that created a lot of redundancy in presentations and things like that. I guess from my perspective, we probably need to think about, or my suggestion would be that we think about a short-term solution and then look into possibility of, you know, providing a long-term solution relative to like upfitting the room to be able to have that capability. I don't know in my mind. I guess I'm trying to think about examples of, I feel like the committee structure exists and we have specific numbers of board members in place on committees because it's supposed to be a subset of the board. It's not supposed to be all 9 of us engaging in the committee conversation. And, you know, I think when in this structure, because it's up here, all of us come during the 4:30, 4 o'clock time, and we're all up here, but that actually is not the purpose of committees. The purpose of committees is so we have a smaller subset of the board participating in that discussion, voting, and then something going to the larger board. I think we have to find a way to be able to kind of meet that need relative to our business, but also the sort of realities of the limitations of the room right now. So I think I'd be interested to hear from other board members what their thoughts are.
Well, you know what, I was just thinking, I guess we have to choose, you know, which room, we'll have a discussion about rooms, you know, which room is going to yield to a more productive meeting. I guess that's basically what you were saying, Mr. Bohannon. And I think preferably I like the other room, because you're right, when you're up here on the stage, you know, for me to kind of find out what Ms. Crowley is talking about and read her facial expressions, I have to kind of look down. But if we're together in one room, you know, the way we were during our orientation, it kind of yields to more good conversation and discussion.
Yeah, to continue what you alluded to, Alex, you know, it seems like for staff, this room is the one set up for these type of productions, and maybe there's a way to configure furniture where we can replicate what we had in 230, whatever, I can never remember the room numbers here, and do something, you know, where there's all these empty seats. And we have all the equipment in here. Like, I'd rather see us have good discussion, somehow set up, you know, tables in front here, or like, maybe it is, you know, I mean, I don't want to have to do a renovation project, but I think there's a way we can, I mean, just like we reconfigured the staff from the back to over here. I feel like there's a creative solution here that wouldn't cost a lot and would take advantage of how we've already equipped this room for this purpose.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got subgroups of 5 in a committee, you could have one table right here, and then the rest of us could just sit up here and still be a part of the conversation, but we would, you know, but it would be more focused with that conversation with the committee.
I guess we just need to come up with the idea, you know, where we just don't feel like we're on stage. I think maybe in that figuration out there where we're facing each other and 4 or 3 board members up here still has that staged feeling. So I know there's a solution out there.
Madam Superintendent, would you mind getting, to kind of assisting with that? I think just so board members can kind of get some potential ideas around where we could potentially go.
Yeah.
I think after today, though, because the item is on the agenda, we probably would need a place we would like to go now. So would board members prefer for us to remain in this space until we have that option, those options that we can look at, but we're still going to move to the 4 o'clock time? Is that something that's acceptable? Or do we want to go ahead and move somewhere prior?
I think that we should respect the fact that right now we need to find an alternate, like a plan B for the spacing, but still change our time frame so we can have enough time if needed for the discussion to start at 4.
Okay, any further comment or question about this agenda item? All right, thank you. I will move to action items. We have 2 this evening. The first is consider approval of posting revisions to policy 5140 for public comment. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, that passes. Second item, consider approval to post proposed revisions to policy 9000 for public comment.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? All right, that passes. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, February 14th. And with that, we are adjourned.
I would like to call the meeting to order. May I have a motion to go into closed session to discuss a personnel matter?
So move. Second?
Second. Okay, all in favor? Thank you. We are now in closed.
Thank you for joining us on Your School Channel, Cable 2.